So from the terminology perspective, defining what is a startup, we have this very kind of simplified way of communicating what is a startup, what is a scale-up, and what is a small business or a smaller side of SME. And basically, this is divided to two levels. On bottom and top, it's looking at the perspective of growth ambition and scalability of the venture. And from left to right, it's whether the business model or idea and the team, whether it's unvalidated or whether it's already validated. So basically, a startup is looking to come up with a new innovative or new innovation, create a new innovation to market and get that validated that there is true value. And once that has been identified, to becoming a scale-up. And a small business has a validated business model, but is not necessarily having an ambition or interest to grow, or haven't decided to look for more scalable model to delivering their business. And then the scale-up can come from either one of these directions, but basically that means that there is a clear working business model and the scalability processes and business model that can be scaled, and therefore then that can be called a scale-up. A key difference between entrepreneurship in general and the startup is that the startup is really about an entrepreneurial team working together with innovative idea in search for a repeatable and scalable business model with ambition and target to grow fast in a big and or fast growing market. So key essence is the team, and that's also one big part that makes startups somewhat more challenging in the beginning, because that is a part that is not necessarily easily available or easily figured out. In some settings, the team may already exist from a past venture, from an existing job, founding with colleagues, or it can be coming as a team from a hackathon or a university project or any of those types of natures, where it's basically kind of like team coming together for a setup where then they work a little bit together and together find an idea that they feel, at least some of them feel comfortable of looking to push that forward together. But typically when it starts with a single person starting to build a team, that actually may be much harder as a process. But nevertheless, it's very important, and we will look into the ways of overcoming this part in this module. So a reminder on the success factors. Really, the material that we have composed over the years, we have had this perspective into the importance, and it's also validated with this great research done by Bill Gross, a serial entrepreneur investor in US, out of their own portfolio, and there's a great TED speak about this topic, and that we also have links to at the end of the presentation. The key part here is to really understand the relevancy of what really makes a difference for the potential success of the venture, and specifically the kind of, it's counterproductive into what typically are on the top of the list when looking at early startup ventures, that more attention should be put into making sure there's a good team and good execution in place. Of course, the timing is most important. It's also one of the most challenging things. We'll also look at the timing aspect in context of the tomorrow's part when it comes to idea and the market side, and then on the idea still is more important than the business model, but at the same time, business model is also more important than the funding. So funding is just an enabler to help develop or help accelerate things. Funding alone doesn't make basically anything happen. The key failure factor out of the statistical perspective is labeled very kind of summarized under premature scaling. Now, if we think about the failure factors in general, we could say that all the failures ultimately depend on the decisions that co-founders make. So that's a big part of the entrepreneurship, is that there is no one else to blame for the decisions made that then lead to the outcome of whatever that is. Deciding not to learn something, deciding to take too much risk, making wrong choice, whatever that may be, but that wouldn't be very helpful in trying to avoid those things. So one of the kind of what premature scaling means is that is not by intentionally or accidentally scaling any dimension of the business too far without taking into consideration all the other aspects that business should also look into and the founders should look into. So too much money, too much customers, too many team members, too much focus on any individual item like product without looking at how these things should be in balance. So basically the premature scaling is that trying to do too much too early in any one dimension. So as we look at the everything in the Growth Academy context, this is the open standard framework, startup development phases. That is basically an essential tool to help kind of divide the whole startup creation process and scale up process into a manageable pieces for communication purposes and for many other key considerations. So the key here is to see the three main phases that the modules are also divided to: the formation phase, the validation phase, and the growth phase, as well as then the subsegments within each of those through ideating, concepting, committing, validating, scaling, and establishing. Each of these include the description of a startup or scale up at that development phase, and then this framework captures the key terminology of the core items and elements that are most relevant to be highlighted in that development phase, and then also the kind of the key target or activity with the problem solution fit, vision, founders fit, and so forth, kind of happening here in parallel, as well as then the consideration that startup has these two main dimensions: developing the idea to product to actual business, and developing from talent to co-founding team to a growing efficient organization. So both of these two main elements should at least be considered to be developed in a balanced manner and not overscaling either side too far along. Also, the formation, validation, and growth give clear. They are like a bigger milestones to pass, and they give clear phase to really help focus on one phase and getting a startup successfully through that phase by focusing on mainly on those items only that are relevant in that phase, and not needing to worry too much of the coming phases, as well as when moving to the next phase, pretty much allowing to almost forget the past and only take the outcomes from that, but the whole working model, operating model should basically start adapting to the next phase, but not yet to worry too much of the coming phase, but not need to worry about the past phase activities either so much anymore. So this is a very helpful thing to help kind of handle the amount of things that need to be successfully executed in a startup over time, and not need to worry of all of the pieces, while at the same time giving perspective and reminder of the overall journey and what's coming and what we have accomplished so far. A statistical perspective to kind of how this, in the context of development phases, if we think in the startup ecosystem, this is kind of a statistical numbers of how much they're, on one hand, typically, this is not a number from any specific ecosystem, this is mainly the numbers to communicate the conversions happening through these development phases, through these numbers. So these numbers, you could multiply this by 5 or 10, or you could to divide this by 2 and get less numbers, but this just gives the funnel of the typical conversion rates. So if we start with 1,500 ideas in an ecosystem with 1,000 people, this starts to convert into something of 60 vague teams. So if we think team members 2 to 3, you could have something like 120, 180 people. That then, again, the number gets smaller. Usually out of those 1,000 also comes these individuals, single solo entrepreneurs that never establish a team, never become growth ambitious, either because they couldn't manage to do it or they just didn't want to do. They chose more of a lifestyle entrepreneurship or a more small company, and that's more manageable for also for solo entrepreneur. But they can also be teams, of course, but that's less common on that side and more mandatory when it comes to startups. And from here, the number goes down to 14 potential startups to 4 really growing startups into 1 significant company. And then depending on the region, the significant can be in the context of in the markets that it's coming from, all the way to getting like 1 unicorn type of company out of this type of statistical perspective. But this is more indicative, and the key here is to see like how much they typically kind of companies or startups exhaust along the way, or they disappear. So, for example, in the case of from 14 potential startups to 4 growing startups, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the 10 were disappeared or they failed. It may also just mean that they basically were left or plateaued their progress at that phase and were not actually scaling from there forward, or that they're stuck in the process for longer period of time.